Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Vic.
I'm excited to have you on. I love what you're up to. I love what you're doing. And just chatting with you prior to getting on here, I'm excited to get into some of the stuff that we were talking about here. But before we do, my listeners know I always love to hear how you got into what you're doing today. What's your journey? What led you to where you are now? And just what got you there? If you mind sharing.
Well, Vic, I'm seduced by ideas. So when things engage me, engage my curiosity, uh, allows me to engage whatever intellectual capacity I have, whatever creative expression I have, that is like a magnet and attracts me. I don't think about, wow, this is a tremendous business opportunity. Uh, I think about, is this something I want to do? Is this something that really attracts me? And you're going to face inevitable obstacles and problems doing whatever you do. So my feeling is that knowing why you're doing it in the first place can sustain you through those difficult times. So I don't have a master plan because, kind of like a moth, oh, this light over here. And I've managed to continually have a career that involves creative expression. Uh, I was first a fashion designer, and I had zero background in that. Although I worked in a retail store, that was about it. And I built a successful clothing business. And I was chosen one of the top 10 young designers in the United States. But it's a lot less impressive than it sounds because I think there were only 8 of us. So to be in the top 10 wasn't a big deal. Uh, and I transitioned into the film business, and I taught myself to direct, to edit, to shoot, to light, all of these different things, which I loved because once I concentrated on being the director, I also was very familiar with all the other areas that go into making a shoot successful and a collaboration successful. And at the same time, well, some years into it, I started teaching. And I teach a course called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas at Parsons School for Design in New York City. And then I met an amazing person named Lloyd Price, who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You may not know his name, but you know his music. Songs like Personality, because you've got walk, personality, talk. And if you can get it from my horrible singing, think how successful he was when he could actually sing it and write it really well. And I was so intrigued by his life, and I was hired to do a documentary about him, which I did. And that opened up a whole new vista for me. And I became a playwright, and I wrote a play about Lloyd's life. We had our first commercial run this past March, and we're going to be opening in Chicago in spring of 23. So I have no master plan. I've never had a master plan other than what's interesting to me. What can I do that I think is cool and that I really like doing? And of course, the reality of having to make a living. So, I can't forget that because as early in my journey, I also became a husband and a father. So I had responsibilities beyond myself. Uh, but it was always about what do I want to be doing? What do I find interesting? What's fulfilling to me? And that's essential. So and along that path, I also wrote the book based on my class. It was an Amazon bestseller. It's called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. It's based on the class that I teach. So I've kind of hopscotched around or pinballed around. There's no linear path. And I think most people's lives kind of zigzag. They don't go in a straight line. Unless you go to dental school and become a dentist or law school and become a lawyer. But I didn't have those prerequisites. I had a double major in philosophy and psychology because I wanted to have 2 majors that would be of absolutely no help in getting a job. And so I succeeded in doing that.
I love your story because it's something that I teach and try to teach entrepreneurs about understanding to follow what fulfills you, what excites you, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of what you kind of did. It was what were you interested in? What you just felt like, okay, I love doing this. I would love to do something like this and learn how to do more of that. Is that kind of what you were doing?
Yeah, yeah, but I have to say that the patterns involved in that, in terms of seeking that fulfillment and all of that, different modes of creative expression and so on, these are things that kind of happen. It's not like I had a plan to get from A to B, then B to C, then C to D, and so on. It wasn't like that. It was just about being open to opportunity and being able to, and this is very important, recognize opportunity. That's a huge part of it, because we all are faced with different opportunities all the time. But if your antenna isn't up, if you're not paying attention, if you're not present, you don't sense it, you don't get it. And so uh, you are correct. But what it wasn't me fulfilling on a plan. It was me finding, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that. I want to learn how to do that, and figure out a way to make a living at it.
No, and it's one of the things I'll always share with them. Like, when you get that excitement or that big interest to do that, and as long as you hone in on that, then the money and stuff will come around. I mean, or the ideas will come to you, or the thoughts will come, or people and circumstances will come to where all of a sudden you can make that to where you can make a living off doing those kind of things. And that's what I love about your story so much in that aspect. Um, when it comes to looking at things like well, let's just look at creativity in itself. When it comes to being creative, is there like a limit to people? Like, is there endless expression to creativity? To let's just go there first, because I could go in many directions with that, but I'll just leave it there.
So are you asking what is creativity, or how do you foster your own creativity?
Both, yeah.
So I think that creativity is the ability to connect dots, basically, where you can, just as we looked up in the skies and created the constellations and then the stories behind those constellations, where in fact it's just a lot of stars, because humans have a compelling need to impose order on things and to try to make sense of things, and are very, very uncomfortable with the notion of chaos. Uh, I don't happen to be uncomfortable with chaos. And so we all have these different organizing principles. For me, in terms of fostering creativity, the way that you create those dots is by being curious and being a seeker, which means going to movies, going to plays, listening to music, reading books, going to conferences, engage with people who think differently than you do. And the more influences and the more diversity of influences that you take in, the more dots there are to connect and that you can pinball around. So I think that creativity comes from first feeding that. And that feeding is a lifelong process, to stay curious. And for me, there's nobody worse to be around than somebody who's not curious, because that presupposes that they know everything already. And that's certainly not a fun kind of a person to be around. So I think dedicating your life to learning, being open to things that you know nothing about and not being intimidated or afraid, and learning from those things, they all feed what you do. And I believe that everything you do informs everything else you do if you're paying attention.
I like that. I like the way you express it with the dots things, because it is one of those things where the more we can have that diversification of a growing up in aspect and so forth, and be able to be around people who have different opinions than us, I think would you say that helps us open our mind more then? And that's why we can open to more creativity and seeing things in different lenses or different perspectives and so forth?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that what's so important is also listening. If you're just waiting for your turn to talk, you're not present and paying attention to what the other person is saying. And, in terms of what you do with your podcast, what I do with my guests in the class is, although I have notes and I've done my homework, it's listening and being present, because then there's other directions that may be sparked that I hadn't even thought of. And it just makes it more spontaneous, more interesting, not only for the guest, but for the people that are listening. So I think that that's really, really critical.
I couldn't agree more with that. It's one of the reasons why with even my own podcast, I don't really like to have a lot of structure per se to it. Because then I feel what I've learned over time is that in the conversation, things will come up and it's like, didn't even expect to even have that. I didn't even expect to go down that rabbit hole. But then it was just like very valuable, wonderful, great information that came. And even the guests be like, I didn't expect to even talk about that. And wow, that was a great convo. And I think it allows that opportunity where we, as humans, we like, you're saying, we're very, the biggest thing that humans fear is uncertainty. And it's one of those elements that we are always, always, always trying to control, compartmentalize, go to comfort. But that's really what our brain wants, not what we really want. And I think that puts us in a position. And one of the questions I want to ask on top of that is then, why is it that, or what people get stuck with creativity? What are the things that why that they like? Because sometimes you could talk to somebody. I've had this with clients where it'd be like, I can ask them a question and be like, let's this, and I'm like, I just can't think. I don't know. I'm stuck. I'm like, well, let's work through this then, to get that spark back in. What are some reasons why people do get stuck when it comes to having like just have it stop get stuck with creativity?
Well, I think a lot of it is fear that people think what you're going to say or do or show is stupid, that you're going to be criticized for it. And, when you talk about essentially humans being wired against uncertainty, that's an evolutionary trait. The uncertainty helped you survive. If you didn't know what was around the corner, there was a chance that you could fall off the ledge, be attacked, whatever it was. So the uncertainty and seeking certainty mitigated risk, or at least that's what it was believed. Also, praying to the rain gods and whatever mythology or religion you believe in. Those are things that sort of psychologically created a veneer of control around your surroundings. They don't. That's not how life unfolds. But I think that the uncertainty is something that people try to avoid. Other people see uncertainty as an opportunity. They can capitalize on uncertainty, whether you're shorting a stock, or you're starting a business in a realm that no one has done exactly that before. You're entering uncertain territory. But you're doing it with a sense of opportunity there rather than fear. So I think that plays into entrepreneurship also. So I think the way you get unstuck is you also have to become, in terms of being creative, fearless. That doesn't mean that you're not afraid. That doesn't mean that you don't have hesitation. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But what it means is that doesn't stop you. And where the fear is a problem is when it stops you, especially if it stops you from doing something you really want to do, an expression you really want to have, but you're afraid that you might be rejected. And I think that what happens with kids, it can be parents, it can be teachers, it can even be your peers, when you're made fun of or your ideas are rejected or made fun of, you're going to be much more inclined to not share those things because you're going to avoid the pain. And avoiding that pain is, I think, another mission in life that most people have. And that can lead to addiction. That can lead to all sorts of things where people are trying to because that pain is a form of damage, if you will. And I think that we all try to avoid pain or somehow soothe the pain. It could be through meditation. It could be through drugs, which is not a good choice to make. But, there's all kinds of ways that we do that. And also restricting our own behaviors and our own thoughts because they become threatening if they're unsettling.
No, it's so true. I mean, I'm thinking about myself here. I remember when it came to when I wanted to write my first book, I was like at 28 and I'm like, I want to get this out there. I think it's time. And I allow fear of like, well, what will it be a good book? This and that. And I asked some friends of mine who were very well to do at the time. And they're like, people write books when they have a huge following. And I was like, yeah, but I want to write this book. I don't care about the following. I was just very passionate about writing a book, but I let a lot of things hold me back. And it wasn't until 6 years later that I finally was like, I don't care. I'm just going to get this book out there. I don't care about, I'll have an editor take care of because I'm not great at writing grammatically. So I'm like, I'll have an editor take care of that for me. And I'm just going to get out there. And I was happy I did. It actually worked out very well for my being self-published, but it's one of those things where, yeah, I can see where the fear can hold so many people back. But would you agree then? But on the other side of fear is the freedom of what they seek.
I think the freedom of seeking is maybe more to the point, because there's a difference, and I think if you allow yourself to explore, if you allow yourself to wander and then wonder about things, that can be very, very powerful.
I love that. One of the things I like to share a lot, I was on a podcast sharing this, and I do share this with clients about, and correct me if I'm wrong when it comes to creativity, but I'm always like, we have to go return back to being kids from that standpoint, right? Because I love studying, being a pediatric chiro. I mean, I was working with kids all the time. Half my practice was that. And it was always amazing because their sense of imagination and their creativity, like the things that they would say to me about the adjustment, or sometimes, Dr. Vic, my brain's not working right. I need an adjustment today. And I'd just be like, I love that. Like, they get this. I love that, but how do we get back to then? I mean, we're talking about fear and you got to be fearless. I get that 100%. I'm with you. But how do we get back to that? Or what are some ways that we can become more creative? Or what I like to say, how to be more childlike?
Well, one thing is that, as I said, constantly be taking in different influences and expose yourself to all these different kinds of ideas through books, through film, through discussions with others, conversations with people you don't normally talk to, whatever, all of that. But the question about the kid, it's interesting. One of the questions that I ask my guest every week in class is, I will say to them, if we knew you when you were a kid, would we see any indication of what it is that you're doing now? And I then asked the question, well, what really engaged you and excited you when you were a kid? When I was a little kid, it was about, we'd play cowboys outside. I never worried about the fact, what do I know about being a cowboy? Only the stuff I saw on television, because when I was a kid, cowboy shows were really popular on TV. Did I worry? Well, I don't know that I could be a convincing cowboy. I didn't think about any of that. It was just, you would act out as a kid. And I was really fortunate because my parents encouraged me. They never set limits on those things. If I wanted to draw, I could draw. If I wanted to write stories, I could write stories. If I wanted to use the home movie camera, the 8mm camera, I could do that. And they never set up boundaries for me. So I don't look at knowledge as being siloed. And I could go from writing to drawing to filmmaking to all these things that I love doing that were a lot of fun. And it really struck me at one point. I was a kid, I had a movie theater in the basement. So my parents let me I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My parents let me go downtown. And so I would rent 8mm movies. I would then design a poster and print it, put it around the neighborhood. And I put together some of these films and they were silent. So I took my sister's portable stereo, and she wasn't crazy about that. And what I would do is, make soundtracks for the movies, sound effects. And, I'd synchronize the tape, which was reel to reel at that point, with the movie, and there'd be sound effects and there would be music and all of that. And then, God, 25 years later, I'm sitting and editing a film and doing an effects mix. Oh man, this is what I loved doing when I was a kid. And all of the things that I'm doing and all of the things that I have done relate to things that engaged me, excited me, and compelled me when I was a kid. So I think your question's a great question. And I think that you have to do a deep dive into yourself. What is it that excited you? What is it that you love doing? And really look at that in a real way, and then ask, why did I give that up? Why did I stop doing that? Or what did I replace it with that made me feel as good? It'd be a little weird if I was playing cowboys on one hand. On the other hand, if I was an actor and become a successful actor and I starred in, Tombstone or some cool Western movie, maybe I was informed by my childhood, and taking part in a movie like that was really cool. Or maybe you're a costume designer for something like that. I mean, there's just so many things that can feed into it, but you just have to look at it with eyes open. And again, that's another part about being fearless, because it's not that, well, what did I know? I was a kid, I was just playing. Well, that play could really lead to something.
No, I love that. And I love how like sometimes they'll come in full circle like that, where you did the film thing and all that as a kid, and all of a sudden you're doing it 25 years later. I love hearing that. Because I think that's where sometimes we can find that deeper essence of fulfillment in some way, shape, or form, because we get so caught up, again, going back to certainty, going back to what can we do. It's all about, if I start a business, this is what I want to do to make money, and here's how I have to do it. I don't care. Well, yeah, this is great, I would love to do that, but this is what I need to do. I need to make money to pay the bills, and I want to be successful here. And they dismiss that other element of what they really wanted to, or what they enjoy. And I think that's what midlife crisis. There's many reasons why midlife crisis happen, but because you can't. I always tell people, like, from a mindset perspective, you can force things into some way or do something in a certain way, but there's another element of you. If you're not giving you're feeding. I say feeding your soul. If you're not giving your soul what it wants to experience and fulfilling that aspect of it, you're going to constantly be burned out, go to exhaustion, lead to depression, and then you're going to be looking back at your life going, what did I do? Why? And the people who don't say those things are the ones that are leading those fulfilled lives, fulfilling what they, being creative, being kid-like, and really just being like, having that open mind like you're talking about, and just being open to it, and just be like, I'm going to go and do this because I know that I feel good with this. I don't know if that's going to be the path. I may be bouncing around a little bit, which life is kind of like that, right? And eventually I know that I'll finally figure that out down the road when I'm ready for that. But I know I need to go like in this direction, where we're taught the opposite, unfortunately, in life, to where it's like, no, you need to figure out what that's going to be, and then you go down that path. And it's so against how most of the time, not saying that's always like that. I mean, I went through the chiropractic route, but at the same token, it wasn't linear. I bounced around in computers for a little bit. Then I had a health issue that chiropractic solved. And then that's when I went into business. And then I went to chiropractic school after that. So definitely it came out of left field for me. And I know many others too. So being the fearless, really being open-minded, really getting to that point. Then what happens here, and this is kind of what I was talking a little bit about, imposter syndrome. Let's chat about that a little bit, because it's tying into what we're talking about. I think sometimes when going for, I use the term fulfillment, because when we're really filling our passions or what we enjoy and what makes us like a kid again, I think that really the feeling that comes is being fulfilled, rather choosing to be someone that we're not, or choosing to go down a path that we're not. Do you mind sharing with the listeners what is imposter syndrome, and then how can we be aware of it more? And then how can we change that? So I'm loading 3 questions at you at once.
And I'll preempt that a little bit. I want to say one more thing about certainty. There is none. So the whole idea of seeking certainty and thinking you're playing it safe, honestly, is a bigger risk. Because if you invest so much in the notion of security and being safe, then there's, I mentioned my degree was in philosophy, and there is a phrase, shit happens. And, so I think that if you buy into the fact, well, this is safe, this is straightforward, certainty is really not a real thing. It's certain until it's not, is essentially what it is. And that ties into the imposter syndrome, because the imposter syndrome is people who are concerned that, who am I? Am I good enough to be talking about this? Can I call myself that? Now, there's a difference between imposter syndrome and somebody that's trying to con you. They have a whole different agenda. So I'm talking about imposter syndrome in that you doubt your own ability to do something, even when you do it really well, because you never allow yourself a pat on the back that originates from you. Wow, that did pretty cool there. That was good. And I think it's really important to celebrate your victories, because there's going to be defeats. Life isn't easy. It's tough. And, doing what you want to do, making a living with your ideas, making a living, period. It can be hard. You can go through fallow periods, and it's difficult. But, the thing about imposter syndrome is you add the additional psychological burden of wondering and doubting yourself. And I know people who are very accomplished, but every time they embark on a new thing, they're wondering, am I just faking it until I make it? Am I really worthy of this? Am I good enough? And the fact is that everybody, I don't know if they fake it until they make it. I wasn't a playwright until I was a playwright. I wasn't a director until I was a director. So when I declared that I was, writing a play and actually doing something and heading in that direction, I was willing to make that statement. Yeah, I'm writing a play that I hope to produce. And I was doing that to also hold myself accountable, as opposed to keeping it all inside. So if it didn't work, I never really mentioned it to anybody. So I can't be an imposter because I kept it quiet. Nobody really knew. But, what you're also doing is preventing and cutting off a major avenue of fulfillment, and allowing yourself to like yourself, and allowing yourself to do what you want to do. And it's kind of a hackneyed phrase, but it's empowering yourself, to do that. So nobody wasn't an imposter by the traditional definition until they accomplished what they were trying to do. But you don't start off accomplished. It's a path until you get there. So I think that imposter syndrome is all about self-doubt. And I think that self-doubt comes from the issue of risk, being a perfectionist, which there is no such thing. I love, there's two phrases. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? As the old joke goes, practice. Practice makes perfect. Nobody's perfect. So, it's all these bromides have different counterpoints to them. And I just think that imposter syndrome is something that really plagues a lot of people and stops a lot of people who are very accomplished, very talented. But that doubt was instilled, I think, when they were quite young. And I think it's working through some of these personal issues that free you up, again, to free you up to do that. And you really have to put yourself through that kind of misery and punish yourself when you're doing something. And why don't you give yourself some credit for even trying? Because as long as you're trying, and we're all trying all the time, it's not like you're done. When you accomplish something, that's just another part of the process, right? So imposter syndrome is something to really be confronted, and that confrontation is a very personal one, whether you do it with a therapist or whether you do that deep dive into yourself, if you have the capacity to do that. But it's something that's really important to confront, because it can rob you of the joy of the process you're involved in. And I love the joy of the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more with that. I used to be a destination type person and just very fixed in certain ways, and now it's just like I'm just here and I'm in the process of it all. And process, if you look at the term of it, it means never completed, and you're just always constantly working on something, and it's one of those aspects of really tapping in, because I had a lot of imposter syndrome stuff the way you explain it. That's why I was curious to see what your definition was on that. um in the same aspect of having a lot of self-doubt, and then eventually one day I was just like, okay, I can continue to have self-doubt, or I can just change that and go a different, and just I'm tired of feeling that way, so how if I just go this way? And it was amazing to see the other end of that. So it's kind of interesting. Before we end, I do want to talk a little bit about your book. If you mind sharing your book and what it's about. And also, yeah, you're noticing I love throwing these three questions at you at once. And who did you write the book for also?
You know, a number of people said to me who came to the class, not students, but adults. They said, this is so great, but the ideas you're talking about in here should have a wider audience, because these are things that concern everybody who's trying to either be an entrepreneur, start their own business, uh, make a living with their ideas and the creativity and so on. And I have what made my class wonderful is I had the opportunity, like you doing the podcast, I had the opportunity to meet people, to talk to them about what they do. And that was inspiring to me. I learned from all of my guests. So that was great. So I wanted to have a wider audience for what I was doing and sharing those ideas, because I thought they would be of value to a much wider audience. And fortunately, that's turned out to be the case. So that's why I wrote it. I didn't, it would have been nice, but I didn't expect to make a fortune from the book. But it's very satisfying because I'm very proud of the book that I wrote. And the feedback that I've gotten has been very gratifying. And the book is called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. It was published by Hachette. You can, I love saying this part, you can find it at Amazon or all fine booksellers. So, and by the way, as you may have found out when you wrote your book, it's quite therapeutic. You start reliving things that you hadn't thought of for quite a while and have a different kind of an insight into them as you're looking through the rearview mirror. Did you find that too?
Every book I've written has the exact same thing. It's kind of cool.
It is. It's very cool, especially if you allow yourself to go down those rabbit holes.
That's why I think I wrote my first two books within a year apart, and then I took a couple of years. COVID hit, and I had to refocus on a couple of things, and then I was like, all right, I got to get this next book out, and I did. And I was just like, I told my wife, I'm like, I'm gonna write another book before the end of the year, and she's like, you haven't even finished you haven't even finished your first this one for this year. You're already talking about another one. I'm like, because I have a goal of writing 30 books in my life, but I'm not like saying it has to happen. It's just I feel like you. I love when you were like, I just feel called, or I just feel whatever interests me, and that's kind of what my books are. I just get this thought, and I'm like, you know what? That's something that needs to be expressed to the world. I really feel passionate about that. You know what? When the time comes, it'll come, and the title will come to me. Then all of a sudden, I'll just one day be in a meditation or whatever, and then all of a sudden, like my recent book was Decoding the Matrix, and I'm like, Decoding the Matrix, man, the conditioning of the mind. Oh my goodness, yes, I need to write about this, and then it just comes, and so. But yeah, I love how the retrospecting, going through that, and then the stories that come out, that I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of writing that story or where that come from. And I didn't even remember that. And I had to think when I read it later. Sometimes it's like I have to read it later, and then I'll be like, I didn't even see that. Wow, that story, I don't remember that. Holy cow, I put that in there. Interesting. So I don't know if you had those kind of experiences too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it triggered memories that of events that happened 35 years ago that I didn't remember thinking of them since, but they came forward, fully formed. And that was really interesting, because I think it's writing is also a really interesting way to learn about yourself. And I think that those, again, it's the It's the dots in terms of creativity. When you start going back through your own story and you pinball around and realize certain influences or certain things that happened that you had never put together quite like that, because you really didn't have to. You weren't writing a book or anything. So you weren't going through that kind of review of your own life and your own thoughts about things. And all of a sudden they're coming together and pinballing all around. And you discover new things or rediscover things that seem to have a greater significance than they did when they happened originally.
That's so true in so many ways, and it's easier to connect the dots when you're looking in the rearview mirror of life. And it's funny because yeah, I just went through that in the last year of like, choosing. I was doing business mindset coaching, but why would I get into the mindset? Why did I have to have spirituality? And I started looking back at my life and seeing where have those been showing up. And it's like I looked at chiropractic, and I'm like, man, the neuroscience, functional neurology, the laws of the body, all that stuff. I'm like that right there. And I just started putting the pieces together. And I'm like, that's okay. This makes sense where I'm at here now. This is cool. This is why I'm moving in this direction.
No, the Dr. Victor Manzo origin story.
Yeah, exactly. And you can even go further back, right? You can go even further back as a kid and go and tying the dots there. What were things I
Right.
did there as a kid? What was I interested? What things did I enjoy? And then you pull that, and I think the more we can do more retrospect and those kind of things, the more we can get the answers of what we're, uh, leading to more of that fulfillment type stuff. Jeff, before we finish, how can people find you, follow you, get your book? I know you already mentioned where it's located, but just again, so they can hear it again, for all the listeners.
The book is called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. It's available at Amazon and all fine booksellers. Uh, you can follow me on LinkedIn, B. Jeffrey Madoff, and I post clips from my class. So you'll hear from a wide range of really interesting people, from Academy Award winners and Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, to entrepreneurs and designers and artists and all kinds of people. Uh, and that's one of the things about the book also is it's not a recipe for success, because there is no such thing, but it gives you ideas to think about and what resonates with you. Uh, so LinkedIn is a really good source. Also Instagram at A Creative Career, which also has the clips from the class and so on. Madoffproductions.com is the website for my production company. And then I also, one of the things I do on a daily basis for fun, it's kind of my meditation, if you will. I mean, exercise is my meditation. And also, every day I walk 5 to 7 miles around New York City. I love New York City. And I take pictures of life in New York. Could be buildings, it could be an interesting shot of just a person doing something or whatever. And on Instagram, it's at Jeff_Madoff. And what I started it for was just to keep my visual chops going, and also to keep me awake and keep me present, always kind of looking and wow, what's a cool moment that I want to capture, and just shooting. And it's fun. I love it.
I love that. And for all the listeners, I'll have that in the show notes for you. Jeff, this was great. I knew this was going to be a great convo. I really enjoyed it. And I know the listeners will too. And I just want to thank you for coming on, taking time, sharing some space with us here at the Mindful Experiment. And, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, because I believe we need to, as humans, start to get back into our creative side. And I think that will help us shift the gears to find more fulfillment in our lives and so much more.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Vic. It was a lot of fun. I just feel like I'm sitting here talking to a friend. So thanks a lot, man.
I appreciate it.